Playable villains. How games make you the bad guy. At Guy So Sly.
In gaming, the protagonist is the avatar in which we project ourselves onto. Through them, the entire game's narrative and gameplay mechanics unravel. But one thing is almost always true about the protagonist. Usually, they're depicted as a morally upright individual. And
yeah, like most of the time the protagonist is like, especially with Nintendo games, it's like they're like a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout type, like a Superman type, where they can do no wrong, kind of like Goku or whatever, where he's always upbeat, never really has any character flaws or anything like that. And not every game is like that, but a good majority of them are, I'd say.
yeah, that makes sense. A good person is always the ideal person, and by putting ourselves into their shoes, we therefore become the good guy. But fuck that. I don't want to play some thumb-sucking pansy. I want to light leaves on fire with Daniel.
Oh my god, I did that. I've done that too. Like back when I was a little kid, I would have like a magnifying glass, and I would go outside and just find here's the thing, like I had a loquat tree in my yard, and whenever the leaves would like go brown and fall off or whatever, I would just go outside and just burn them with the magnifying glass because my mom would never have me like let me have a lighter or whatever. So I'm just like, I'm gonna go get the magnifying glass. And then I did that, and what else? I also cooked a shitload of like red ants. And it wasn't just like the little tiny ones, it was the big ones too. Those guys were fucking bitches. And they pop whenever you just like cook them.
Playable villains can be a fun twist to the otherwise tried and true, but admittedly predictable concept of playing as a hero. I mean, I'd rather play Dragon Quest over something like Hatred, like any day, but the opportunity to create and explore villains as playable characters is too cool to pass up. And I'm gonna go over the various forms playable villains can take in video games. But first, we have to understand that villainy is kind of like subjective. Anti-heroes. I won't dwell on this concept for too long.
Yeah, so like if there's like a protagonist in the most generic sense of like a good guy, there can also be generic bad guys where they're just like pure chaotic evil for no reason, and they're just gonna always do the bad guy thing, To some degree that's kind of fun, but also it's like there's like a little bit of novelty to it, but after that it's like, give me like some morally ambiguous character that sometimes they make gray decisions, like, was that good or was that bad? You don't really know. Those characters are more interesting to me,
since they're not really playable villains, but I feel like I should go over this for a bit just to clearly distinguish them. Yakuza, or Like a Dragon, or whatever, is a series about buff, oily Japanese men being on other buff, oily Japanese men. There's typically some sort of criminal conspiracy involved too. Kazuma Kiryu, one of those aforementioned buff, oily Japanese men, is our protagonist, and he's a pretty good guy. See, while Kiryu is a good person, he's someone who operates outside of the law, and while that doesn't necessarily make him a villain, he's 100% worked under villainous people. The Yakuza clan he works for is always getting into some kind of bullshit, and a lot of the time, Kiryu wants nothing to do with it. He only ever really steps in when people he's attached to personally are hurt, and some of the things he does in the process is without consideration for the people around him. But while we as players know that he's really a kind and considerate person and that all he's ever really wanted is to take a break from all the fucking shenanigans, that doesn't stop the general public from seeing him as nothing more than another goon. He's Yakuza. He's stuck in an endless cycle of crime, and others find him guilty just by association. The player has to face that fact multiple times throughout the series. Kiryu is misunderstood, and he owns it. Anti-heroes usually have some reason to atone for their past sins, or at least some kind of Robin Hood complex. Gameplay mechanics
Yeah.
like stealing or reckless fighting become a lot more acceptable when you can justify the context they're being used in. But I think we also
Oh,
have
yeah.
to look at things that we perceive as villainous. Villainy is, in truth, a human concept that we label onto things that we feel are malicious. Think shark attacks or getting fucking vaporized by lightning.
Yeah. Like elemental things that you think are out of your control. What is it? Like what's that concept for like what makes a good story? There's like human versus human, human versus like another person. I meant for human versus human. And then there's like another human, and then there's human versus self. So it's like an internal battle, and then there's like human versus environment. So, you know, like you just said, like sharks, lightning, sandstorms, tornadoes, hurricanes, stuff like that.
And a lot of the time, at least in games, these cases are a direct result of humanity's hubris. Games like Ape Out and Carry On, where people are fucking with something and the player is then given control over this entity, and its ultimate goal at this point is to survive and thrive at the same exact.
Bro, I never played Ape Out. I had no idea it was like that. You like with this new lens of me thinking that, oh, okay, you're just an animal and you're gonna do animal shit, and you're actually the bad guy. This is actually really interesting because I thought it was like you're just like a red little blob that looks like an ape, and you just like go around smashing people. But this is actually really interesting now.
Goal is humanity, except it doesn't have the same principles and standards as humanity because
Oh my
why
god.
would it? This creates a really interesting gameplay scenario where you're bulldozing through people, tearing them apart, slamming them against walls, throwing them out of windows. It's a really awful but morbidly fun power fantasy that you're really not going to get playing strictly as a hero. And this is
Oh my god. I actually have to go download these games. These games look awesome.
all a bit more justifiable when you're controlling a creature that can't just decide to become something else. But what if you could? Player choice, a staple feature in gaming at this point. For the most part, it's up to you to decide what kind of build or narrative path you want to go with. But with anything decision-based, you're going to have to outweigh the pros with the cons. And with games where you can clearly become a villain, understandably, there's going to be a lot of cons. Things like bad endings that end things on a more sour note, or losing out on an entire tree of skills because of your narrative decisions. The other problem with playing as a villain is that it's very easy to alienate the player by making your protagonist too much of a shithead. Villains that have motivations and ideologies that you can at least understand and sympathize with somewhat are a good workaround. Entertaining villains typically don't see themselves as the bad guy, even when their methods most certainly are. That doesn't mean all villains need to be that way, but it definitely helps when you're playing as one. For example, back when I played Overwatch, you know, before Blizzard lied about their content plans for it, one particular character that stood out to me was Doomfist. Disregarding how much they've watered down a lot of the nuance in his gameplay with Overwatch 2 because of quote-unquote balance, I was actually more of a fan of his story. There's a lot of things
I had no idea like any of the characters in Overwatch had like any sort of story. I thought Blizzard was more concerned with who all these characters like their, what is it called, relationship status or whatever, whether they were straight or gay. I thought they were more concerned with that than the story, because I've actually never heard like any story to any of the characters. The only things I ever heard about was just that. Oh my god, Blizzard's so fucking up. But yeah, like, what was it? Characters with, like I said, that have more moral ambiguity are way more interesting. You know, and using like Handsome Jack as an example, like he saw himself as a bad guy. Because he wasn't in Borderlands 1. Was he? I don't remember. I know he was like the main bad guy in 2 or whatever. But god dang, Handsome Jack was awesome as a bad guy.
things to like about him as a character. His roots as a traditional African martial artist, his dissatisfaction with the business he inherited, literal Nigerian prince, and the fulfillment he finally achieves as he kills his mentor and just straight up takes his name. Yeah, him wanting to drive conflict in the world so humanity can evolve is a trope we've seen a million fucking times, but his commanding presence, his charm, and his delivery is all just... Like, you guys don't know how much hype there was for this character. I remember watching his origin story for the first time, and it was like this completely new thing they did where it was more of like an anime, and my god, you're telling me I get to play as him? I can do that? I can punch my way out of prison?
Bro, there's actually like animes and shit, or are those just like short little tiny videos of Overwatch? Well, that actually looked pretty good.
Also, the guy who did ultimately end up voicing him, Sa Ngauja, sorry if I butchered it, absolutely kills it with his voice lines. Just listen.
I'm coming for you all.
A great leader adapts to their team, not the other way around. The future has no place for you.
I'm having
Nice.
a good day.
No one expected the Roman Empire to fall. Perhaps that is why it did.
Having insight into the context of his character really adds to the immersion of playing as this sophisticated and charismatic yet calculated and ruthlessly efficient warlord.
Okay, essentially, like we're going around the fact that like the more you learn about the bad guy, the more interesting the bad guy is, because they're not as much of a Boy Scout character. And you know, if you put the Boy Scout character in any given situation, you can pretty much predict what they're gonna do for the most part. You know, much the same way Thanos was a really good bad guy for the Marvel movies. You know, whatever, you know, loopholes and plot holes and story points like that are obvious, like, you know, flaws or whatever. Thanos was a really good bad guy because he thought he was the good guy. Yeah.
It's honestly super sick, and it's no coincidence that hero shooters, fighting games, MOBAs, pretty much anything with a large lineup are all great examples of games that have successful playable villains. A diverse cast of characters is far more appealing and accessible to the general gaming audience. A larger roster with characters that fill out specific niches.
And also having like a large cast of characters is kind of like, in my opinion, it's like a creative / story flex, you know? Like, oh, look at our cast. We're so good at creating characters in stories. Like, we're just so awesome. Like, it's a kind of a creative flex that you can have like so many perspectives and, you know, for all the different characters. So I think, but you know, you can't do it for the sake of diversity. You have to do it for the sake of wanting to create a good story for that character. Okay, so yeah,
makes the choice to play as a villain much easier. It's also just fun because in some cases it creates a kind of role reversal where the bad guys you've spent all game fighting become playable. It's a cool moment when a boss kicks your ass in one game and you get to kick ass as that boss in another. It also just opens the door for more creative gameplay. Not being chained down by some in-universe morality offers a sense of freedom you're not really going to get anywhere else. Concepts like controlling the elements to bend reality to your will, or a more chaotic and irresponsible approach, start to make a lot more sense when it's a villain doing it. Case in point, the Play as the Joker DLC for Batman Arkham Asylum. Joker's gameplay offers a unique blend of whimsical tomfoolery with sadism, resulting in...
I actually never played this DLC, even though I played like all the Batman games. Like, what the heck?
A highly unconventional playstyle. First of all, he swings around like a fucking monkey. All of his movements are extremely flamboyant and exaggerated. All the while, he's planning explosive chattering teeth, electrocuting people to death with hand buzzers. What else? Spraying them with toxic gas, yes.
Oh
war
my
crimes,
God.
of course. He constantly taunts his enemies, reveling in the mayhem you've created. His world is one of twisted amusement, silly antics, and violence. And I think it's really neat to have a chance to be put into his shoes like that,
That's
even
actually
if
cool.
for a moment. Playable villains in video games can be a really refreshing experience.
Yeah, like, wasn't it like in like Devil May Cry, most of the time you're playing as like Dante. I'm not talking about like 6 or whatever. Is that when you play as like a lot of people? But like a lot of the DMCs before, you're playing as like Dante, and the main villain in that, like all those series, was Virgil. And then all of a sudden, one of the games is like, oh my god, you can actually play Virgil now. That's so cool. I'm more interested. This is a really good feature.
Deviating away from hero-centric stories just for a bit
Oh
can
yeah,
add
Shadow.
variety, allowing players to explore more morally complex characters and experiment with more diverse gameplay opportunities.
Yeah.
Embracing the dark side and the unique freedoms that come with it can add depth and excitement to the overall experience, and uniquely offers a captivating glimpse into the world of villainy.
Nice. Yeah, this was awesome. Like, I really like this because, like, there's not enough videos on, like, how awesome bad guys are. We need more playable bad guy games, all right? I want to see that. I don't want to be the good guy anymore. I want to be the morally ambiguous person or the bad guy. Just straight up let me be the bad guy. I don't know. Like, a lot of the games I played in the past, like I think games have been getting more or less better when it comes to like choosing your role. Like, what was it? Even in Mass Effect, you could be like, there was like, you could be like the blue good stuff or the red bad stuff or whatever. There was those what was it, like talking or the communication mechanics or whatever. And even in like some of the Jedi games, you could choose, you want to be lean more towards the Sith or more towards the Jedi ways or whatever, and that'll kind of influence your powers and whatnot. I think decisions like that are really cool. Even though they're still like on a rail, more or less. It's like, okay, let me first playthrough, let me do the bad playthrough, second playthrough, let me do a good playthrough, and then, and then maybe a third playthrough of like whatever I want, Just give the player some more options is what I would advise. But yeah, I thought that was great. Definitely. I'm a fan. I want to see some more. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I'll catch you guys later, all right? See ya.